What scientists paid the ultimate price for their work? Daniel Kaplan, Karen Wetterhahn. I agree that many of these other deaths are tragic. Marie Curie, as an example, is particularly so. Still, that was back when our knowledge of science was far less than it is now. I mean, we didn't get radiation. She was truly in unknown waters. Karen Wetterhahn was the first female chemistry professor at Dartmouth College. Not back before WW2. We're talking about the 1990s. Her research on the dangers of heavy metals, with her knowledge and experience and with the financial backing and equipment of Dartmouth, should have made her safe. Unfortunately, 2 drops of dimethylmercury on the back of her lab gloves were enough to kill her. Why dimethylmercury? At the time, it was used for nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy. At the time, dimethylmercury wasn't known for its ability to very quickly pass through latex gloves. She cleaned her lab before taking her gloves off. Again, as far as we know, this was standard procedure at the time. I'm not a scientist. I know that mercury is a heavy metal, but the kind you find in old thermometers isn't all that dangerous. I've seen pics of people playing with it. You can simply wash your hands and probably be fine. Methylmercury is nasty stuff you might get from eating too much fish, like with Minamata disease. Dimethylmercury is a different animal. It is one of the most dangerous chemicals out there. Dimethylmercury apparently doesn't kill you right away. The 2 drops passed through her glove and were in contact with her skin for seconds. It was enough. Unlike a lot of other substances, dimethylmercury is capable of passing through the blood-brain barrier with tragic results. 3 months after the incident, she had stomach problems. 5 months after the incident, she began having significant neurological problems like stumbling and speech slurring. No matter what the doctors did, and they tried everything they could, she wound up falling into a persistent vegetative state. She eventually died 10 months after the exposure. Dimethylmercury stripped a vibrant, healthy woman of everything, even robbing her of her mind. That's part of why scientists will use just about any other substance. It's just too dangerous. Incidentally, I first ran across this when Franklin Vo wrote about it, I think. I've run across the story several times since. 213.2K views. View 15,361 upvotes. David Tussey. I can't believe no one has mentioned Rosalind Franklin. She was a scientist working with James Watson, Maurice Wilkins, and Francis Crick. She died from multiple cancers associated with the radiation exposure during her work in discovering the double helix of DNA. Franklin was an expert in a powerful technique for determining the structure of molecules, known as X-ray crystallography. When the crystallized form of a molecule such as DNA is exposed to X-rays, some of the rays are deflected by the atoms in the crystal, forming a diffraction pattern that gives clues about the molecule's structure. Franklin's crystallography gave Watson and Crick important clues to the structure of DNA. Some of these came from the famous Image 51, a remarkably clear and striking X-ray diffraction image of DNA produced by Franklin and her graduate student. A modern example of the diffraction pattern produced by DNA is shown below. To Watson, the X-shaped diffraction pattern of Franklin's image immediately suggested a helical, two-stranded structure for DNA. She died at age 37 while battling multiple cancers. Exposure to high radiation levels during her X-ray work on DNA is considered a factor in her death. Francis Crick, James Watson, and Maurice Wilkins were awarded a Nobel Prize in 1962 for their work on DNA. Rosalind Franklin had died in 1958 and thus was not eligible. Additionally, Watson and Crick barely mentioned Franklin's contributions as they rose to fame, despite the fact that Franklin's work was critical to discovering the double helix nature of DNA and ultimately the entire structure. Rosalind Franklin University of Medicine and Science in Chicago is named in her honor. 46.8K views. View 2,346 upvotes. Jim Moore Reader. Meet Dr. Karl P. Schmidt. I chose a pencil sketch of him rather than a photograph because he was famous for labeling his specimen bottles at Chicago's Field Museum with a number 2 pencil. So, pencil just seemed right. In the early years of the 20th century, Dr. Schmidt was the top herpetologist, reptile scientist in all the world. From 1941 to 1955, he ran the zoology section at Field Museum. He was still employed by the museum when this incident took place. On September 25, 1957, Marlin Perkins, the director of Chicago's Lincoln Park Zoo, called Dr. Schmidt with a rather usual for Dr. Schmidt request. "We have a new snake here and we don't know what it is. Could you identify it for us?" Of course he could, so the zoo sent it over. Marlin Perkins was a very good snake man himself, so this snake must have been really exotic. Yes, this is the same Marlin Perkins who created the famous nature television show Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. It was a young boomslang snake. Native to Africa, the boomslang is a very pretty green and black beast, extremely green. They knew it was venomous, but at the time they believed snakes with the fangs in the backs of their mouths like this one aren't harmful to humans. While handling the snake, it bit him on one of his thumbs. So, what does this crazy bastard do? Instead of going to the doctor like a normal person would do, he got a notebook and started documenting how he was feeling. One of his notes read as follows. 9 p.m. to 12:20 a.m. slept well. No blood in urine before going to sleep, but very small amount of urine. Urination at 12:20 a.m. mostly blood, but small in amount. Mouth had bled steadily as shown by dried blood at both angles of mouth. He died before 3 p.m. the next day. At his autopsy they discovered he was bleeding from everywhere, lungs, out his eyes, kidneys, intestines, and so on. Today we know the boomslang to be one of the most lethal snakes in the world. Its venom is stronger than the venom of a king cobra. 99.1K views.